This video is about the characteristics and outcomes of markets which are in monopolistic competition. In terms of the characteristics of markets in monopolistic competition, we would see a large number of relatively small firms, and these firms are all producing slightly differentiated products, so not homogeneous or identical as we'd see in perfect competition, but not really highly differentiated products as we'd see in oligopoly. There are very low barriers to entry and exit, which means it's really easy for new firms to move into the market when they're attracted by high profits. As we'll see, this has really important implications in terms of our diagrammatic analysis of market outcomes. There's not perfect knowledge and information that we see in perfect competition, so that knowledge and information is imperfect when customers and businesses are trying to look and make comparisons between different businesses, and firms are price makers. But they do face relatively price elastic demand curves, so they are quite limited in the prices they set if they want to retain their customers. And so the types of market in the real world where we would see this type of market structure in action might be taxi companies or hairdressers. So we can see here our diagram which shows monopolistic competition in the short run. And the first thing to note is the downward sloping average revenue curve. So firms are price makers, so that gives us a downward sloping average revenue curve, and then the marginal revenue curve, which is going to have a slope twice the steepness of the average revenue or the demand curve. You've also got the marginal revenue curve and average cost curve, which take the usual shapes of those different cost curves. Now, firms in monopolistic competition are going to be profit maximizers, so they are going to produce at the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and then you read up to the average revenue curve to show they will charge the price shown by PM here on my diagram. And that means that in the short run, supernormal profits can be made, and that is shown by the area of the rectangle made here by the difference between the average revenue and average cost curve. And the final thing to say here is that this is essentially the same diagram as the monopoly market structure diagram. The average revenue curve you could draw just a little bit more shallow to show the fact that you've got slightly more price elastic demand for the firm in monopolistic competition, but in terms of the placement of all the curves and in terms of the supernormal profits which can be earned in monopolistic competition in the short run, it's the same diagram as monopoly, and so that saves you learning another diagram. Now, in the long run, we start to see the big difference between monopolistic competition and monopoly markets. And the reason for this is the very low barriers to entry in monopolistic competition. And so this means that supernormal profits, which can be earned in the short run, will attract new entrants who will compete those supernormal profits away in the long run. So as we saw with perfect competition, firms entering the market increases the market supply, and that reduces demand and pushes prices lower for the individual firm. And that demand, that average revenue curve, will keep shifting left just up until the point where only normal profits are available. If there are any supernormal profits still there and the average revenue curve was further to the right here, then that would mean new firms would keep entering the market until it was all gone and it was all competed away. And the other side to that would be if it went further than this, if the average revenue curve shifted further to the left and firms started to make losses, then some would just exit the market, leaving normal profit for the rest. So we reach this stable equilibrium in the long run with average revenue running tangent to the average cost curve and only normal profits being available at that profit maximizing output where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Thinking now about efficiency outcomes, we can say that firms in monopolistic competition are likely to be productively inefficient, and that's because the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, that's where they're going to produce in order to maximize their profits, is not necessarily going to be equal to the point where average cost is minimized, which you can see there on my diagram. That's what we're looking for productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency will not be achieved either because price will be set higher than marginal cost. So you can see here on the diagram, here will be the price set at this profit maximizing output, and marginal cost will be lower than that price that is set at that output. And then finally, they're also going to lack the supernormal profits that exist in other market structures like monopoly and oligopoly that they could use to invest in research and development and innovation to get those efficiency improvements over time that we need in order to be dynamically efficient. So actually you can see there, none of the efficiency outcomes are actually achieved in monopolistic competition, but we could argue, and certainly in terms of the static efficiency outcomes, that in monopolistic competition that price is lower and individual firms' output will not be restricted by as much compared to those other market structures of oligopoly and monopoly. And so while allocative and productive efficiency is not achieved as it is in perfect competition in the long run, more competitive markets do generally produce more efficient outcomes, certainly with respect to productive and allocative efficiency, than market structures like oligopoly or monopoly. A bit of further evaluation we can do on monopolistic competition, thinking about some of the characteristics and how they differ from perfect competition particularly, which we said would achieve those economically efficient outcomes in the long run. Well, in monopolistic competition, we've got this product differentiation with firms trying to produce those slightly differentiated products. And we could argue this is a waste of time and resources for firms to try and make their products slightly stand out in this way. But then again, we could counter that by saying that it provides really valuable choice for consumers to give them a range of different options to choose from when they're buying those products and services. A similar sort of argument you could make as well about the use of advertising. So you could argue that increases costs for firms and with little benefit really for consumers. Or you could argue that actually it kind of keeps businesses on their toes, knowing the competition that's out there that's trying to take their customers away. And we could say it might reduce X inefficiency, which is really an economic way of saying that firms might get a bit lazy if they weren't spurred on by this additional competition and seeing what's around them in that way.